So you just heard Anthony Albanese say, this is what real reform looks like. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I've heard him make a spending commitment without any explanation on where the money would be coming from. I mean, you know, the Australian government right now is committing a record $9 billion this year towards supporting access to childcare. It is through an arrangement that is means tested, so it is targeted towards those most in need of that support, and the more your personal income, the higher your personal income, the less support you get, to the point where at a certain level you are expected to look after your own childcare requirements at your own expense. That is a fair and equitable way of doing it, and I would just remind everyone that prior to the COVID recession, we had the highest workforce participation by women ever on record under our government. And we also had reduced the gender pay gap to the lowest level ever on record. So we were on the right track with our policies to support access to the workplace and to ensure that we maximise workforce participation by women. I don't think it is an efficient and appropriately targeted way to allocate limited taxpayer resources by making these sorts of payments universal. I mean, that essentially means that whatever your income, however high your income, the taxpayer is going to fund your access to childcare. I mean, I don't think that mainstream Australians would think that that is a reasonable prioritisation of limited resources.
By making it free to 97% of people, is it actually affordable in your view?
Well, I mean, a couple of things would happen. I mean, the costs will blow out, there's no question. I mean, when we came into government in 2013, one of the challenges that I faced as incoming finance minister was significant blowouts in the cost of childcare subsidies based on the policy settings that we inherited. And the other thing that happened under Labor previously, and that would happen under this scheme, is if there's no price signal to parents, I mean, they'll just childcare centres will just ramp up the cost. I mean, they'll just ramp up the fees, and which of course will then be responded by presumably through a stricter regulation, and will go into a roundabout of less efficient access to childcare in the end, because I mean they'll have to have a regulatory response in order to control.
Well, Labor does say that would be up to the ACCC to monitor that.
So more regulation. I mean, the thing is, I mean, they're trying to fix something that's not actually broken. I mean, our current system is working very well, and we are providing record support, record taxpayer-funded support to facilitate access to the childcare sector, or to childcare services. But it is means-tested, and I think that is fair and reasonable. You shouldn't have access to these sorts of subsidies irrespective of your income.
It is restrictive, though, to parents and primarily women. Do you at least concede that there can be more work done in this space?
Well, this is something that's always under review, but we pursued very comprehensive reforms after very significant work done in this space to ensure that we got the policy settings right, and we do believe we do have the policy settings right. Well, these things are always under review, but what was announced yesterday wasn't a substantial reform. I mean, what was announced yesterday was making something free and throwing money at it without explaining where the money would come from.
OK, what about some of the other policies that Anthony Albanese has identified? Trains being at the centre of manufacturing and $20 billion or so to modernise the electricity grid.
Well, look, I mean, again, I mean, my general comment look, we delivered our budget on Tuesday. It's the government's budget. The government's budget is our plan to get Australia out of the COVID recession, to facilitate the creation of as many jobs across the economy as possible. I mean, what was said last night is all very interesting, but it's not going to be implemented over the next little while. And what I heard last night was a lot of promises and a lot of money splashed around that is not going to be spent, but there was no explanation as to where all of that money was coming from. So we'll continue to focus on implementing our plans as a government, and that is what the Australian people expect us to do. OK. Just
on to borders, Minister, the Victorian Premier has hinted that restrictions may have to last longer than expected. That's the Victorian side of things. Meanwhile, the Queensland-New South Wales border may be closed, and it may even be reset because of this outbreak of cases in New South Wales. If that did remain the case, would that mean that your numbers in the budget may already be under question?
Well, again, I mean, I think we had this conversation on Wednesday.
We did, but things have worsened since then, it would seem.
Well, no, well, some things between budgets and budget updates, there are always swings and roundabouts. I mean, budgets present budget estimates, and of course, you know, from the first day after the budget, some things develop in a better way than anticipated. Some things develop in a less advantageous way than anticipated, and in your subsequent budget update, you reconcile all of the up and down and swings and roundabout movements and provide an update in terms of the fiscal numbers. But you know, what I would just say, of course, I mean, in the context of a pandemic, there is a higher degree of uncertainty even than usual, and I mean, this continues to be an evolving situation. It'll be an evolving situation for some time. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't make decisions based on the best available information at a specific point in time. And when you put a budget together, obviously, you know, you've got a deadline by which you have to make these decisions.
What if Queensland were to reset the clock, though, when it comes to New South Wales, given this marginal outbreak in Sydney at the moment?
Well, you know, any restrictions will have a negative impact on the economy. I mean, any restrictions of this nature will slow down the pace of the recovery, will lower the strength, I mean, weaken the strength of the recovery. And so from that point of view, you know, we should do everything we can to avoid any outbreaks and to get on top of any outbreaks as swiftly as possible so that we can keep economic activity as free-flowing as possible. I mean, that's in a way that is COVID safe. I mean, that clearly is the mission. I think that everybody understands that.
Yeah, but would it be unfair for people in New South Wales if the outbreak seemed low as it is at the moment for the clock to reset?
Well, you know, this is the point that, you know, I have made consistently all the way through. I mean, of course, we support measures to protect people's health, but any such measures need to be proportionate, and you know, they need to be proportionate to the actual risk. And you know, I mean, there ought to be a consensus across the country. We ought to be able to find a consensus across the country as to what the appropriate thresholds and the appropriate objective criteria are in the context of which further restrictions are either imposed or lifted.
The West Australian government, meanwhile, has got itself a surplus. Should that be a licence to spend now?
Well, you know, they've got a $1.2 billion surplus. I would just point out here that as a result of our government's reforms to GST sharing arrangements, this financial year, the West Australian government is getting a $1.5 billion top-up payment in terms of their GST on top of the $2.8 billion base payment they're getting. So a $1.5 billion GST top-up payment as a result of our reforms and a $1.2 billion surplus. So without our GST, without our reform to GST sharing arrangements, they would not have been in surplus. So that's point number one. Point number two, you know, of course, I mean, at this point in time, with a lot of businesses challenged, with a lot of jobs at risk, with the unemployment rate elevated, including in Western Australia, you know, all levels of government need to step up and provide the necessary fiscal support into the economy to save as many jobs as possible, to restore as many jobs as possible, and to create as many new jobs as possible moving forward.
OK, just finally, Minister, you're up for the OECD gig. I don't want to rain in your parade here and to apply some negativity, but what's your plan B if you don't get it?
Well, look, I'm a veteran of selection contests, and I know that, you know, if you want to have the best possible chance at being successful, you've got to be totally focused on Plan A. You've got to be totally focused and totally committed on Plan A. I am totally focused and totally committed to Plan A. You know, I've got a great team of you know, people who will help me give it my best shot, and you know, I will be doing the best I can to secure this position for Australia. I'm very humbled by the nomination. I'm very humbled by the faith the Prime Minister has shown in me, and I'm going to do everything I can to respond to that faith by securing the position if I can.